Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Wainwright, today we've heard business owners tell us they believe discrimination would prevent them from being successful in business in the absence of this program. Statistical analysis can shed further light on the question by comparing situations where a DBE program is in effect with situations in the same jurisdiction the program is not in effect. Do you agree, and do you believe doing that provides useful evidence? And if so, what does the evidence you have reviewed demonstrate?
Thank you, Representative. We've heard from Ms. Lerdahl about what's happened in Washington DOT. The overwhelming majority of examples of so-called parity that I'm familiar with are quite recent, and as some DBE programs have matured and programs like them. In my experience, they're rarely statistically significant, which means they don't necessarily show parity at all, which is what we learned with the subsequent disparity study that was performed by Washington DOT, despite US DOT ignoring those results when the request to rescind the waiver came in. But second, these results, in the rare instances that they occur, are statistically significant in a context in which availability figures have been artificially depressed due to discrimination. Remember, I testified that minority and women-owned firms are forming at much lower rates than similarly situated majority firms because of discrimination. If such firms were forming at the same rate as majority male firms, there would be few, if any, findings of parity. Third, you really shouldn't consider a category of DBE to have achieved parity until you've seen the same result appear consistently in the private sector, that is in the census data. Again, this is like the blood pressure metaphor I've used previously. Remember, the only markets in which there's been any attempt to level the playing field are the public contracting markets, like the federally assisted transportation market. In the far larger and more lucrative private sector, DBE programs are rare to non-existent, and majority male-owned firms generally get almost all of the business. We also have to remember that majority male-owned firms have literally had centuries to grow and establish their firms with effectively zero competition from minorities and women. Early on, the lack of competition was a direct result of laws that intentionally and explicitly disadvantaged women and minorities. Later, it was the result of discriminatory practices that were permitted to continue despite civil rights laws. Finally, we should consider the practical effects of suspending the operation of the program every time some subcategory of program participant achieves a modicum of success. This won't reduce discrimination, it will just tend to increase bankruptcies, as we've heard so poignantly from Ms. Lerdahl. And then those same entrepreneurs or others like them will need to be added right back into the program.
Thank you. Dr. Wainwright, this committee has received reports that some state and local transportation agencies have excluded certain minority, ethnic, or gender groups from their programs because these groups have finally reached or exceeded quote unquote parity, according to a disparity study. Do you believe excluding from the program certain groups who've reached some measure of parity in the market is the right approach?
No, it's not, and I believe that was what I would just address my previous response to. So maybe I misunderstood your initial question.
Thank you. I have limited time, so Ms. Lardell, you stated in your testimony that after being excluded from the DBE program, you bid on several contracts, but were unsuccessful. To your knowledge, did those contracts go to other DBEs?
Thank you, Representative, for the question. No, absolutely not. They went to large electrical companies that were not DBE firms. And in fact, our experience in the state of Washington was when the waiver was enacted, prior to that, the DBE community had about 17% participation. And after the waiver was enacted, that fell to about 8% or 8.5% participation, approximately. So those DBE dollars didn't go to other DBE firms. They actually went to the prime contractors who self-performed that work.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I yield back.